The main person Carrie White is interacting with throughout this novel is her mother, Margaret White, because Carrie White does not have any friends. She's very isolated from her peers. She does not have a single friend in that school. And um so the main person she's interacting with is her mom. And Margaret White, the main thing we know about her throughout this book is that she's very isolated. She's deeply religious, and she is abusive. Like, she is extremely emotionally and physically abusive. One of the first mention of Margaret White's abuse is when Carrie comes home from being bullied for getting her period, and her mom comes home from the laundromat, and the mom knows that Carrie got her first period. She is furious. She's screaming at her, telling her she needs to ask for forgiveness. And she literally is physically shoving her into a closet, very forcefully hitting her in the head. The last page of this sentence, you could see that Margaret White is literally choking Carrie out to the point where Carrie feels her brain go fuzzy. It says, and then her hand tightened on her neck until Carrie saw red, lurid dots in front of her eyes and felt her brain go fuzzy and far off. She's literally choking her child out to the point of physical unconsciousness just to get her into this closet. And here, page 70, you see how hard Carrie is fighting to get out, and she's screaming, she's cursing. She is like fully panicked. And it mentions in the book that anytime Carrie did something that the mom was upset with for like whatever reason, and it's usually a reason that's insane, it doesn't make any sense. She would literally shove her, physically force her into this closet and leave her there for like hours and hours and hours and hours. Literally, I think in the book it mentioned she spent like an entire day in there. And that is just on top of physical abuse, that's just like neglect. Like that's insane. Like it's insanity. Like Margaret White's abuse is completely out of control. Day one, already page 69, 70, her abuse is already out of pocket and out of control. Every time Margaret White opens her mouth and does anything in the book, I'm just like, what are you talking about right now? Like, literally, what are you talking about? Like I don't get it. Like, she's just acting in a way that completely isolates her from others, like Margaret White. We see here on page 16 that her extremist views have led her to a point of such loneliness that when her husband died, Ralph, and also when she was in labor, she was completely alone. She gave birth alone in her house. No one came to visit her. No one was curious about the baby. You have to be so isolated for something like this to happen because everybody loves babies. And I feel like, especially when someone dies, everyone comes out of nowhere, people you even forgot about, to try to help you through. And the fact that no one came to support her and help her, it kind of shows how intense and extreme she was for her to isolate herself to that level. And a big part of her character is her religious fundamentalist beliefs. So, and I think she's written to be a caricature of religious fundamentalist people. So, Dr. Henry Munson is a professor that studies cultures, and he's specifically interested in studying religions. And the main thing that he finds with Christian religious fundamentalist people is they promote reading the Bible extremely literally. They establish an in-group and out-group, and what you have to understand is literally anybody, it's like, oh, like they're either with us or they're against us and they're evil. And literally anyone could be part of the out group. Even Christians that are a part of another sector that they view as being less strict, if they push them and group them into the out group in their mind.
Viewing the world like this really encourages isolation from others because if you view everything as part of the out group and anyone who looks at things a little bit differently than you as being evil and bad, um, it'll and then people who think the exact same of you as good and holy, it does encourage isolation from others. And you could see this on page 65. The book briefly mentions Ralph White, who's Carrie's dad. And Ralph and Margaret White were once part of a church, but then they felt like, oh, like this church is too modern or whatever. And they're like, oh, like this church isn't what I want. So we're just gonna pray at home. And it says Mama held worship on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Fridays. These were called holy days. Mama was the minister and Carrie was the congregation. Services lasted from 2 to 3 hours. So you see, Ralph and Margaret White have viewed the out group as bad to the point where they're isolating from even other Christians. And it's like, oh, the only good ones that know the truth or whatever are us. And we're the only ones we can trust. So it encourages this isolation because it's encouraging this like fear and anxiety. Carrie hated growing up like this. She really hated it. She really yearned to have some sort of independent life from her parents and to make connections with her peers and to have friends. And it mentions on page 28 that when Carrie was a child, she really fought so hard to go to this Christian youth camp because she wanted to make friends, she wanted to have fun, and she she really wanted to go because no kid wants to grow up isolated from the world. And her mom was very deeply against it. She felt like it was a sin because everything is a sin. Because it's just like, oh, like those aren't real Christians. The only real Christians are me. And like, basically, is really how she feels. And Carrie literally spent the summer and the time before sewing to try to save up money. And her mom did cave in. She was able to go because, Carrie was the one paying for it. And sadly, even when she was able to go, the entire summer, all the kids picked on her and bullied her and harassed her. And a lot of the motivation behind that for the other kids was just because Carrie was overweight and socially awkward and didn't fit into the norm. So sadly, she had to leave the summer camp early. She had to leave the summer camp early and go home. And she was in tears, which was so sad because the first time that she was able to gain some independence from her parents and try to build a connection to other people, it just went so horribly wrong. But this is also an example of how extreme that Margaret White views everyone as the out group, and everything that's in the out group is bad and evil. As a teenager, Carrie still feels very alone and isolated. We could see from this poem she writes, Jesus watches from the wall, but his face is cold as stone. And if he loves me as she tells me, why do I feel so all alone? So we could see even as a teenager, she yearns for connection with her peers and with friends. But since her mother is just so fanatic, she just feels very, very lonely. Honestly, I'm surprised Margaret even lets Carrie go to school because usually when people are hyper religious to that extreme level, they usually end up homeschooling their kids because they're viewing as everything as dangerous and bad and they want to have that full control. So I'm honestly surprised Carrie even goes to high school and isn't homeschooled. Honestly, that also might be just for the plot because a lot of the plot of what happens wouldn't be able to happen if she's homeschooled. But yeah, I just thought that was something I should mention.
They're against evolution, they're against abortion, they're against homosexuality, they're against civil rights, they're against women's rights, they're against gay rights. And they also are against drinking liquor and they want prayer in school. And these people, a lot of their beliefs originate from these pamphlets that came out in the 1920s around and called The Fundamentalist, A Testimony of the Truth. And this was a way to push back against what they referred to as religious modernism, which was basically churches and religions kind of accepting ideas such as evolution or accepting new ideas about like science and philosophy and having that incorporated and accepted in the church. They did not like that. They felt like they needed to push against that with these collection of essays. And then you could see in the very beginning of the fundamentalist, you could see they think in this very black and white way. They think teaching science can be dangerous because if someone believes in science, they can't believe in miracles. And if someone can't believe in miracles, they can't be a real Christian. So they believe in this very like all or nothing kind of thinking. Like this, like they really fall into that logical fallacy of like slippery slope fallacy. And like they very quickly is just like, oh, everything is evil, everything is trying to turn us against Christianity and is a threat to us. Like they come to that conclusion about literally anything. In the book, it's mentioned that Margaret White went to the same high school as Carrie White back in the day. And she was just so offended and shocked that they would dare to teach evolution in a biology class. He's just like, oh my God, how dare they do this? She would be attacking people with a Bible um, underneath the stairwell for smoking cigarettes because that's just like so profane. Like that's just like so like not pure and not godly. And the thing is like you see these insights in the things that she does when she was even a high school student and the things that she thinks later on. And if you think about it, if Margaret White was even just like had like a little bit of social skills, she and like was around people who thought similarly to her, she would probably totally end up in these kind of organizations. Part of the danger of very quickly viewing things as being a danger or a threat is, okay, what do you have to do when you're approached with a danger or a threat? You go into this fight or flight mode and you have to fight and be aggressive. And
Page 47 of the book, Carrie talks about the imagery in her house and all these religious paintings. And she says that how her favorite picture is this painting of Jesus on a green hill with lambs, and everything is peaceful and tranquil. And she talks about how that's her favorite painting in the house, especially because all the other paintings are depicting these events that are very tragic and chaotic and anxiety provoking and very end of the world. For example, Noah's Ark floating above the agonized and drowning sinners, and also Lot and his family fleeing from the great burnings of Sodom and Gomorrah. It has a lot of stories in it, and the thing is, it has a lot of stories with a lot of different themes, and choosing to focus on these stories and these images where it's a lot of chaos and agony and torture and sadness and tragedy. It's going to kind of prime you to feel and act in a way that's very chaotic and almost aggressive because you're seeing and viewing everything like it's the end of the world. So you're naturally going to act in a way that's chaotic and anxious and aggressive. And I feel like seeing the imagery of this house, it gives you an insight of how the people inside are and how they feel. So, in a way, this is a real introduction to Margaret White because this is before Margaret White enters the house from her job. And from the paintings that she chose to hang up all over the wall, we could see this insight on her that she views things very extremely and chooses to focus on tragedy and aggression and chaos instead of seeing beauty and hope.
And you see, when these people do that, it could very quickly turn dangerous. Like you could see, even someone recently in 2022, this pastor Greg in Tennessee, he held this book burning of Harry Potter and any books that promoted witchcraft, like Twilight and Harry Potter and things like that. And something I found kind of like humorous when researching is like there are like a lot of instances of like church pastors hosting these like book burnings, and there's been incidences where the fire department beforehand, when they heard they were promoting these kind of events, there'd be times where they'd be like, hey, if you do this book burning, we're gonna have to step in because this is a fire hazard. And then they would turn and then they'd be like, okay, and then when they would comply, they would do book slashings where they where instead of using fire, they would just like rip apart and like slash books, which I feel like it's kind of humorous how anticlimactic that is, because it's very like, okay, hold on, be like, this is dangerous, this is threatening our children, this is threatening our religion. Like, you know what I mean? That like, because there is a catharsis of seeing something on fire, like, whoa, but like slashings, like that just seems like so like silly. If you're banning books, you're banning ideas, you're banning stories, and censoring information that people could have, that people can relate to. And when you limiting people's access to information and stories is very like a fascist way to thinking. But the history of book burnings are very tied to fascist regimes and like dictatorships. They were a big part of the beginning of the rise of Nazi Germany. It is a very dangerous thing. These incidences in America are on a much smaller scale, and they're like, so it's not like, I wouldn't say that it's that bad yet, but it does have ties to that when you go back in history. And you see the American Library Association, there are these groups like Moms for Liberty that and Parents' Rights of Education. So there's these groups that's like, we need to protect the children. And it's like, protect them from what? From like the fact that queer people exist, like, you know what I mean? And you can see in this chart right here that the titles, there are currently 4,240 book titles that these groups are pushing to get banned, and we could see this is an all-time high. This is like the highest it's ever this is like the highest amount of books that are being pushed to be banned in not only schools but also public libraries. So this it's really dangerous trying to say that anything that's about queer or BIPOC folks or minorities or civil rights is people's like about these people's voices and lived experience, and to claim that that's dangerous and these stories need to be banned, need to be taken off shelves, like that's literally the beginning of most fascist regimes if you go down and look at it. Right here we have a great quote from someone of the American Library Association. Each demand to ban a book is a demand to deny each person's constitutionally protected right to choose and read books that raise important issues and lift up the voices of those who are often silenced. You might be wondering what these national book bans have to do at all with Margaret White, the mom of Carrie White. And the thing is that she does subscribe to this ideology. And if Margaret White was even just like had like a little bit of social skills, she and like was around people who thought similarly to her, she would probably totally end up in these kind of organizations like Moms for Liberty that are trying to ban books because they're dangerous. Like the idea of evolution is dangerous. By putting the pieces together, you could see that people who are in this group that believe education is like, and books and all this stuff is dangerous, them and like Christian like fundamentalists that want to get all these things like banned, you will see the Venn diagram is a circle. The groups that are pushing for these book bannings are Moms for Liberty, Citizens Defending Freedom, Parents' Rights in Education. The biggest of which is Moms of Liberty, which Donald Trump is working with very closely. Another thing that these people are doing is setting up crisis pregnancy centers or fake abortion centers. So basically what they do is they find locations that are relatively pretty close to actual like Planned Parenthood and like those kind of facilities that provide healthcare services, including abortion. They set up relatively close to that, and they try to lure people in that are pregnant, and they're trying to disguise themselves as a regular pregnancy center, but they're actually not, and they're using scare tactics and misinformation to frame abortion as something more dangerous than it is. They target people who are already vulnerable and are intentionally misleading their practices. They're also made to look like medical facilities. Like they have a waiting room, and when they take you in the rooms, like the rooms look like doctors' offices, but they're not. They do not provide health care, and therefore they're not subject to the oversight that healthcare places have to abide to. They're not abided to follow HIPAA laws. Listen, like even if you yourself, I understand if you're in that kind of situation, you have to make a personal choice, but to purposely give out false information to people who are already vulnerable and to intercept that is something that is very dangerous, that like these Christian fundamentalist people do, that they find acceptable. Margaret White definitely falls into that group of people who are very anti-choice because they're anti-woman and anti-sexuality in general. And they feel like, oh, well, if you do the sin of opening your legs, you have to suffer the consequences of that and just deal with it because that's what you get for indulging in that act. There are people who genuinely think that, which I feel like is quite insane, to call a human life a punishment for someone's like bad choices. Like I get like I'm using a lot of quotation marks because that's just like an insane way to think. But there are people who do think like that, and Margaret White will definitely falls into that because she has really extreme views about sexuality in general. So we see in the book, Margaret White consistently refers to breasts as dirty pillows, and it mentions that in the novel, when Carrie was a child, they had these neighbors, and one of them was this teenage girl that liked to, during the summertime, she liked to go into her private backyard and just do some sunbathing, and then Margaret White would go over there and harass her and her mom, talking about, oh my god, like you're being so obscene and profane. Oh my god, this thing is sinking. it's like, you're being so obscene and profane, like showing off your dirty pillows and da 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 da, this and that and the third. And like, it was really extreme and crazy. And there was one day, Carrie White went to that girl's backyard because she was little at the time. She was like 7. She wanted to make a friend. She wanted to talk to the neighbor. And then she pointed to the girl's breasts, and she's just like, when did you get, like, what are those, or something like that. And she's just, and then the girl, the teenage neighbor, was like, oh, like, those are my breasts, everyone gets them when they're older, you'll probably get them, your mom has them. And then Carrie responds like, oh, my mom told me that she got her dirty pillows from being bad when she made me. What a weird thing to say. And like the girl's just sitting there like, oh, no, they're pretty, everyone gets them, like, they're normal. But Margaret White, like, really believes this. She believes that for some reason, because she definitely had breasts before she had sex with Ralph, because they were already married at the time. And unless she got married when she was like 10, she definitely went through puberty. But this is something she says a lot, like, oh, I got breasts because I was bad when I made Carrie. But the thing that I find so crazy is that Margaret and Ralph were married before Carrie came. Even though Carrie was unplanned, they were a married couple at that point. So it's like, what do you mean you were being bad? Like, like, even within the realms of following the rules of Christianity, like, you did it. You checked the box. So why is it still bad? You know what I mean?
In the book, it mentions that Margaret and Ralph White did have premarital sex, but that resulted in a miscarriage. And then it talks about how Margaret and Ralph White were fighting lustful thoughts, and um they were living together, and they ended up conceiving Carrie. So the book doesn't state it explicitly, but I think I think it's supposed to say they had sex once before wedlock, which resulted in a miscarriage. But Carrie's conception, I think, was during their marriage. I'm not 100% sure. It doesn't kind of state it clearly, but that's what I think this says. On page 261, we see that what's going on in this scene is Carrie is trying to go to the prom, and Margaret is trying to prevent her by causing all this drama and going into way too much explicit detail about Carrie's consummation with her, with her and her dad. And she goes into this like insane rant where she's talking about she um how she liked the feeling of sex, but she felt deeply ashamed of it. And she felt that afterwards she felt something growing inside her, and she thought it was a cancer that God was giving her to punish her for her sinful deed. um and then she was gonna take a knife and to cut it out, but that was actually Carrie. And then she's talking about like, oh, I should have took you out and killed you when I had the chance. Like, this woman is deeply unhinged and needs a lot of psychological evaluation. This woman is in deep need of a 5150. Like, I am so sorry. This is out of control.
It's still bad, you know what I mean? um I think that's a really, like, I like, it's really interesting. There are some Christians that do struggle with that kind of thing, because it is kind of weird to view something as like, oh my god, this is bad, this is evil, this is so, like, this and that, like, and I have to resist to be good in uh the eyes of uh of God or whatever, and then you're supposed to suddenly flip a switch and feel completely different once you're married, you know? Like, you hold this belief for such a long time. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there are a group of people who do struggle with that kind of thing. Um, and then also, the way Margaret treats periods, the onset of period, which is just a normal part of puberty, is insane. The way, when she doesn't tell Carrie anything about what a period is, and when she gets her first period in the gym locker room and everyone bullies her for not knowing what it is and for basically having a panic attack, um, Margaret White was like, "Oh my God, you have to ask for forgiveness because you were cursed with the red blood because you may have had a lustful thought or listened to rock and roll music or did something evil, and this is uh the Lord's way of punishing you or whatever."
Page 117 of the book, Carrie is getting ready for prom, and her mom, or it's like the day before prom, and her mom bakes a pie. And then Carrie says, oh, she doesn't want to eat the pie because sweets like pie give her pimples. And then her mom responds with, uh, your pimples are the Lord's way of chastising you. Now eat your pie. Huh? Huh? Like what? So someone who thinks this is not going to believe in birth control in any form if she thinks that acne is the Lord's birth control. Like, oh my God. On this page, we see that against her mother's wishes, does get ready to go to the prom, and Margaret White is pleading with her. She's like, I could see your dirty pillows. Everyone, they'll be looking at your body. And Carrie goes like, those are my breasts, Mom. Everyone has them. And then she's like, take off that dress. We have to burn it. We have to pray for forgiveness. So here we see that basically Carrie putting on a nice, appropriately fitted dress and feeling pretty, she feels like Margaret feels like it's a threat to her because she feels like Carrie is attracting sin or something like that. Like she feels very strongly like, and she's just like, oh my God, it's a sin for you to have a body. basically basically the sin is like it's a sin for you to have a body and show clothes that show it, but the dress is not super showy. It's honestly like, the way it's described in the book, and then even in the movie, it's not like it's like it's not like totally out there. Like it's a pretty modest, normal looking dress. You know what I mean? So her reaction to this being like, "Oh my God, like you're attracting the sinners, like they'll look at you, they'll laugh at you, you're like they can see your dirty pillows." Like this is just so over the top. This is just like an example of how she views a woman's body and sexuality in general.
Like, what an insane thing to think. So, like a period is a punishment for maybe having a lustful thought or listening to a certain type of music. Like, Margaret White's views on the female body and sexuality in general are just so extreme that in the real world, like, she would definitely, I don't think she, honestly, Margaret White does lack a lot of social skills. So I don't think she has the social skills to work at these pregnancy crisis centers where they're tricking people into keeping, into not getting an abortion by giving false information and fear mongering and doing all this. Like, if Margaret White had a little more social skills, she would be a part of it. But her social skills are lacking so much that, like, I feel like she would be able to send money or support in other ways, but she would not be able to be on the front lines because you do have to be you have to have a somewhat friendly demeanor and be somewhat socially appropriate to do this kind of thing, and she's just not. um yeah, like, so we see Margaret White's views on the female body and sexuality in general. It's not too much of a jump to be like she would support crisis pregnancy center because she would be anti-choice. And religious fundamentalist people are also going to automatically be very homophobic because, and very anti alternative gender expression or anything like that, because they are for upholding the status quo. And I know they don't really like to think of themselves like that because in the Bible there's a lot of stories about people fighting the persecution against Christianity because during those olden Bible times, like, Christians were the minority. That is not the case in current day America, but people like to fantasize that it is because they like to indulge in this fantasy that they're being persecuted because they're of their religion's just beliefs, and that makes them a good Christian. But like in reality, like, they're just they're just hate criming people, you know what I mean? And then crying and then acting like they're the victim because they can't get away with hate criming people or making people feel uncomfortable or upset in like a social environment without some level of like persecution. I mean, not like persecution, more just like social scrutiny. um I don't know, but basically religious fundamentalist people are going to be very homophobic and for things like conversion therapy. And you see in this chart that I'm going to put right here, conversion therapy for minors is still legal in a lot of US states, like currently more than I thought. And um I don't know how to explain that conversion therapy is bad in a way that's gonna make a homophobic person like understand, because like they've I feel like in a lot of ways they've already decided what they decided. But I feel like labeling someone as bad or good because of how they identify and who they love is like insane, and trying so hard to have them change an integral part of their being by using these methods and like gaslighting and back in the days, like even physical torture, like physically electrocuting people. Like that's crazy. And yeah, religious fundamentalist people are still pushing conversion therapy centers to this day, and that's really scary. And that's really sad for anyone who ends up in those kind of places because they feel like they have to change themselves to be accepted by their community. You're also probably thinking, what does this have to do with Margaret White from Carrie? Um, Margaret White is, I have no doubt that she's homophobic because she is against even heterosexuality. She locked her daughter in a closet and left her alone, like, and locked it for like hours and hours. I think maybe like the whole day because she got her period and she felt like maybe she got her period as a punishment for having a lustful thought about preemptively probably a boy her age that's in her class. So if she feels like she needs to punish heterosexuality, there's no doubt to me that Margaret White is not going to be an ally to this kind of thing. Just so you guys know that there are people out there that are uh, that are part of the queer community and that are also religious. And the Trevor Project website does have links um, to accepting churches and places where you could still have that connection um, with you could still have that connection, but like be able to identify as being part of the queer community, which I think is helpful if anyone needs. Um, yeah, your sexuality and who you are um, doesn't make you bad or good or anything. It's just neutral. It just is. So, in conclusion, Margaret White's extreme religious beliefs, like extreme fundamentalist religious beliefs, lead her to be anti-science, anti-education, anti-choice, anti-woman, anti-sexuality. That's kind of like all the third one. As well as homophobic and lacking critical thinking skills. I think all 5 of those things would really make her love President Trump, I think. And yeah, that is the conclusion of the video. Thank you for joining me on Tiff Talks. I hope to see you again next time. Bye.